I'm Jenny Wise with the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and I'd like to present the results of our COVID-19 qualitative interviews among MaxWise combined cohort study participants. This virus has really shown everyone's privilege. As public health authorities issued restrictions to control the transmission of COVID-19, disruptions in employment, education systems, childcare, social connection, and income altered just about every aspect of our lives. Stay-at-home and social distancing policies would eventually prove effective in controlling the spread of the virus, but these socially placed restrictions also changed our daily structure and our ability to tap into the social and functional resources we're accustomed to using to support livelihood. Now, women and other marginalized populations, including people with HIV, have experienced greater social disruptions, and these restrictions may have exacerbated underlying socioeconomic vulnerability and aggravated mental health conditions, including stress, depression, and anxiety. To help alleviate this negative impact, we must first understand how social disruptions impacted mental health outcomes. And so we conducted qualitative interviews across 72 men and women enrolled in the MaxWise combined cohort study. Interviews were conducted between June and November of 2020, and purposeful recruitment strategies were used to recruit participants by HIV status, history of prior COVID infection, and reported financial strain. A team of coders worked together and used an iterative process using inductive and deductive techniques, discussing any disagreement until 100% agreement was met. Overall, participants described significant decreases in social life and social support and an overall increase in mental health concerns. And where mental health concerns such as isolation, stress, depression, and fear were similar by gender, COVID-19 restrictions impacted the lives of men and women in very different ways. Women experienced more financial strain and lapses in social support, whereas men describe greater disruption to their daily lives and routine, including disruption to employment, physical activity, and sexual activity. Participants describe disruption to their routines, traditional activities and events, and social lives. One participant describes how COVID-19 restrictions caused her to miss meaningful traditional events. I can't go around family. Birthdays, we can't celebrate because of COVID. We can't celebrate holidays. I don't go anywhere. I just go to work and come back. Another participant discusses her dissatisfaction with her social life. I mostly would invite people into my house. We'd have dinners. We'd have small parties. Since March, I've only seen 2 different friends for like 10 minutes, 6 feet apart. That's just not enough. I miss my friends. Participants also described how social support was altered related to COVID-19 restrictions, including traditional emotional support, but also the functional support such as social services and their ability to maintain their healthcare access. Specifically, participants described disruption in family connection, human connection, and functional support. I miss the human touch. I miss being able to see people in person. Another participant describes the difficulty gaining access to the services she needed during the pandemic. Everyone else I know has had their care navigator get their groceries to them. None of that's happened with me. They see me as resourceful, strong, independent, which is true when there's not a pandemic. As human beings, we thrive with structure and social support, and the isolation and lack of routine stemming from COVID-19 related policies affected the mental health of MaxWise participants. Although some were able to cope effectively with COVID-related restrictions, many experienced depression, stress, and anxiety, and these experiences were compounded by previous traumas, including the early days and stressors associated with HIV. One participant describes her depression. I was crying every single day. My mental health, I was a mess. I was very depressed. While another describes how the pandemic triggered the previous trauma of her initial diagnosis with HIV. I think for a lot of our people, this is like having to live through the early days of HIV again. For many people, it was a traumatic event, and this has brought those traumatic events back into their thinking. These social restrictions also influence our ability to cope with life stressors. Participants described how altered routines and behaviors, depleted coping mechanisms, and decreased autonomy manifested as hopelessness impacted our lives. One participant describes the feeling of being out of choices to manage life stressors. The best way to not feel hopeless is to get up and do something. That's right in front of my computer, and I see it every day. I feel like I can't do anything right now. And so the mantra, which I've used throughout my life of being active and participating and being proactive and innovative, is taken away. Another participant describes how she stays structured in spite of social restrictions. My life's been affected. It's been somewhat isolated, trying to rearrange a daily schedule to keep myself entertained and keep my spirits high, to keep from going into a depression. Finally, one very important aspect to take note of is how participants described how privilege influenced their choices and mental health during the pandemic. Socioeconomic status forced trade-offs to be made, and government incentives, while appreciated, would only provide temporary relief. One participant describes, people are just having to really choose their livelihood versus their lives, which is most unfortunate. Another participant portrays how privilege influenced our lives and stressors during the pandemic. The virus has really shown everyone's privilege. I had the privilege of a work from home option because I work for a school. I still had a job. Some people just lost their job within 2 days and had no backup. Take-home messages related to this presentation. Although COVID-19 related social restrictions were necessary, they led to changes in our routine, social support, and behaviors, which negatively impacted the mental health outcomes among MaxWise participants. Socioeconomic vulnerability at the beginning of the pandemic moderated the way that social disruptions impacted mental health outcomes during the pandemic, and gender was very much related to this. Therefore, gender-informed interventions to improve social support, functional support, and adaptive coping should be considered. Finally, allostatic stress load must be considered. Many of our participants have had previous traumas, including an HIV diagnosis, which may have affected their ability to deal with stressors during the pandemic. Now, COVID-related stressors may be one additional thing on their back. We may need to consider additional mental health interventions moving forward. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. I'd like to thank the National Institute of Mental Health for funding this initiative, the MaxWise Combined Cohort Study participants and staff for making this possible, and the entire research team.